The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. The radical, fundamental principles. The Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show, where today we're talking about revolution. I was wondering if my tweet on this and the topic title would actually survive. YouTube is not taking us down. Twitter has not deleted the tweet. I mentioned revolution. When's it justified? We'll see. We'll see what happens. All right. Thanks for joining me on this Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, day before Martin Luther King's Day, and went to the beach today. It was a beautiful day. Sun is shining. It was warm. Water was a little cool, but swimmable. Went swimming. It was a lot of fun. A little too many people at the beach. Anyway, it was fun. It was good. It's nice living on a Caribbean island. It's hard to complain. It's middle of winter. Some of you are probably really, really, really freezing. And I was at the beach. I just thought I'd rub that in a little bit, just a little bit, while we're at it. Oh, wait. We just started. Don't worry. Just started. So, the events of the last few weeks have brought up the question, many of the question of is a revolution justified? And if so, when? And was the January 6th riot, insurrection, whatever you want to call it, was it justified? Wasn't it just, and I've heard people say this, I've seen people say this on Facebook and other places, look, government is out of control. Government is violating our rights left and right. They're violating our rights as much, if not more, than King George did at the founding of the country. The left is about to take over. The left is basically, we're told, communist, and we're heading towards authoritarianism. And we're heading towards complete and utter disaster, a complete violation of rights by every branch of government. They now control the Senate, the House, the White House, and we know what Democrats do. They are rights violators. So isn't it appropriate to defend ourselves? And to defend ourselves by revolting against this democratic regime, this democratic takeover of power. So I thought it would be, so in that sense, why not? Why was what happened in January 6th bad? What is the problem? And if it is bad, and if there is a problem, when would it be appropriate to actually overthrow the U.S. government? Because, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about reversing an election. Yeah, you can argue that it's a steal, that there was fraud, but really, that's not what's driving people. What's driving people is the belief that the Democrats are evil, that Trump is good, and we must save good from evil. We must destroy evil. And that's why they came up with the whole idea of election fraud and the steal. And that's why they stormed Congress on the 6th. That's why they demonstrated it. That's why they were there. They were there to object to a democratic takeover of the levers of power in the United States and to preserve it for Donald Trump. So, we can talk about whether what they did is appropriate. We'll get to that. But let's start with just a basic question. What is a revolution, right? What does it mean to engage a revolution? Well, typically a revolution is the overthrow of political leadership the replacement of a political leadership with another by means other than an election, usually by force, usually through violence. Often the violence is not shooting, often it's just the threat of violence. But it's the violent overthrow of political leadership to replace with the alternative. That is a revolution. Often revolutions are ideological. You had the Communist Revolution. You had the American Revolution. Revolutions that overthrow the existing regime and replace them with a completely different ideology, with something new, with something different. And they're motivated by ideology. Sometimes revolutions are not. You know, in many banana republics and in many countries in various parts of the world, you know, the military regularly overthrows the previous military regime, you know, and there's constant violent overthrowing of one government in the name of another. Whether those are true revolutions or not is questionable, but typically a revolution is motivated by some kind of ideology. Okay. By the way, you can use the Super Chat feature to ask questions, make comments. Anything you want me to comment on that is highlighted, the Super Chat makes it jump out and makes it something that I intend to will comment on. The more dollars you put in the Super Chat, the sooner I will comment on it, and the more likely it is that I will comment on it. The French Revolution is, of course, another example of a ideological overthrow of a government. But you had many revolutions in the 19th century. Many of them focused more on nationalism than on ideology. Many revolutions sought to break away to be able to set up independence. I mean, the 19th century had many internal revolutions that shifted political power within Europe in significant ways. So, in what context would a violent overthrow of the American political system be justified? In what world could we imagine a legitimate revolution in America? Now, first, let's say what a legitimate revolution is. What would be a legitimate revolution versus an illegitimate one? What would be the basis by which to distinguish legitimate versus illegitimate? Well, the basis should always be human flourishing, and the basis in this case should be political freedom. That is, revolutions are justified when they lead to greater political freedom. Revolutions are justified when they overthrow an authoritarian, rights-violating regime and replace it with a regime that is rights-respecting, that is oriented towards freedom. Let me just see something. So revolutions are justified when they move us closer to freedom. When they move us, not closer, when they move us towards freedom. Is audio too high? I can't tell if the chat is suddenly talking about audio. In many cases, Scott says, isn't it a matter of degree? In many cases, it is a matter of degree, but the movement, to make a revolution legit, the movement has to be towards freedom. And the second aspect of it is that the violent aspect of a revolution must be necessary. That is, must be the only way to bring about that freedom. That all other ways, all other mechanisms have been exhausted. And that the current regime is so bad that no alternative exists but armed revolution. No alternative exists but to actually replace the current regime by force from another regime. So it has to be a movement towards greater freedom, and it has to be that there's no alternative. In other words, that there's no ability to vote the regime out, there's no ability to, over time, educate, and the regime is so bad that those alternatives do not exist. I mean, Ayn Rand talked about when one should go on strike. She talked about a few criteria, one being free speech. When you don't have the right to speak, you don't have the ability to make change using reason. What are you left with? Well, all you're left with is the gun. If the country is a one-party system, then there's no mechanism, there's no nonviolent mechanism to bring about change. Revolution becomes an option. If the government is such that it is actively engaging in oppression, actively engaging in the jailing, killing, destruction of human liberty, and there's no free speech, usually in those cases there's only one party as well, then that creates the context for revolution. Right? So think about where we are today. Think about where we are today. We have a political system that clearly violates our rights. It takes our stuff by force. It regulates our behavior. For the most part, we have a freedom of speech, although in certain realms like commercial speech, business, that speech has already been restricted. But for the most part, we have free speech. We don't yet have a one political party. We have alternatives, but the alternatives are becoming more and more alike. And the government is becoming more and more aggressive, and there's certainly a risk given, given democratic, let's say right now, dominance of the legislature, but generally a risk as the political parties are drifting towards greater and greater statism, greater authoritarianism. There certainly is a risk that we will see more rights violation and ultimately, more aggression, more out and out aggression towards individuals. So, is it legitimate today? The left clearly has got a majority. Is the left violating our rights enough so that we should rise up against them with guns and replace them? Now, let's think about what happened on January 6th. Let's assume that that was an attempt revolution, and who knows, we might see more of that in a few days to come. Although I don't think so. I think January 6th was, for now, the last real attempt at any kind of insurrection or anything like that. But what the left is bad. Let's say that Republicans, those who marched on Congress on January 6th, achieved a revolution. Well, does it qualify for what a good revolution would be, right? Would they move us towards more freedom? Would they? Would QAnon, Trump, having destroyed the left, having overturned an election, having taken power by force, imagine the military supported Trump. Would we have more freedom in that circumstances than under a government led by Biden? Really? There's no way we would. We'd have Trump now in complete control, with no restraints, no stopping him. would have given up on constitutional government. Even if the excuse would have been, fraud at the ballot box. Well, fraud that has not been proven in court, fraud that Congress did not certify, fraud that just has no objective legitimacy, that the process, the due process, the process of law has not defined. So any overturning of the election would have been a revolution, would have been a violent overthrow of the existing regime. And what you would have gotten is clearly less freedom. There would have been no alternative political party. How could you secure elections in the future? You can't trust the Democrats. Haven't you heard the reasoning? I keep reading this on Facebook, right? There was fraud. We're sure there's fraud. We're absolutely convinced there was fraud. But in any case, we don't need evidence. Why don't we need evidence? Because it's the Democrats. The Democrats, of course, they'll commit fraud. The Democrats are so irrational. They're so motivated by hatred. They are so willing to violate rights, cheat, and do anything that they would commit fraud. They're communists, after all. And we know communists commit fraud. So there's no point even, really, in evaluating evidence. All you have to say is it was the Democrats, and that's it. That's proof enough that fraud was committed. So any overturning the election results that does not go through the courts, that does not go through due process, is a revolution. It's an insurgency. An insurrection. And as such, it institutes the rule of force in America because it was an election that's overturned. And because it's overturned in the name of what? What is the alternative offered for the left? Is it individual rights? Freedom? No. It's just that we hate the left. They hate the left, the communists. The left are going to do destructive things. So we just hate them. So anything is better than that. What's the positive political agenda? We don't have one. It's economic nationalism. It's who knows what Trump would do if he had absolute control. Shut down the Washington Post, no doubt. So it's not like there was an attempted revolution in the sense of an alternative set of ideas that would lead us towards freedom. There was no set of alternative ideas. No freedom involved. There was an alternative set of pseudo-ideas and maybe worship of a personality that was going to lead us to less freedom. Obviously to less freedom. So to the extent that there was a revolution, the extent that some people call for a revolution, they're calling for a revolution that would lead to less freedom. They were calling for the end of the American Constitution. You don't overthrow the American government and then say, okay, we're going back to the Constitution. That we don't understand, that we've never respected. I mean, really, Donald Trump, as a defender of the Constitution, give me a break. He's never referred to it. He doesn't care about it. He doesn't understand it. If Trump had one-party rule, that wouldn't return us to the constitutional. That would make things a lot worse. So, and that's part of the question you have to ask yourself today. If we're going to do a revolution today, because rights are being violated, some would argue free speech is being constrained, and the difference between the parties is marginal. Who would lead this revolution? What would this revolution be about? What is the ideology that we'd be fighting for? And how many of us are there? So in looking at whether there are conditions for revolution, one has to ask, Are there any alternatives to change the world? Do we have free speech? I'd say yes. We still do. I can still say this. I can still talk. I can still criticize Trump and Biden and everybody in between and not go to jail. Do we still have elections? Yes. We can still express a point of view in elections. We can still run for elections. We still live in a basically free world in which, yes, there were massive violations of rights, massive injustices, things far greater in terms of violation of rights than what King George did. But note that the founders, the colonists, had no means by which to reverse any of those. They had some vague semblance of free speech, not really. They didn't have elections. They couldn't vote, not for parliament, and of course not for a king. If you guys doubt that we have free speech, notice that you guys are railing against the powers to be and nobody's arrested you. Nobody stopped you. Of course you have free speech. The government does not put you in jail. I mean, that is shocking if we don't have free speech. The government must be very inefficient. I mean, it's stunning to me that Americans, I mean, it just shows how Americans take their free speech for granted, that Americans think that, if Twitter puts a little thing on my post, or if Twitter bans me from Twitter, I don't have free speech. No, free speech, banning free speech is what happens to dissidents in China when they land up in jail. That's a country that doesn't have free speech. You saw that in Hong Kong in the last few weeks. Democracy activists who are speaking against the Chinese regime and asking to have the right to vote were sent to jail for long jail sentences. That's not having free speech. As far as I can tell, Alex Jones even is not in jail. Not the worst conspiracy theorists, not the QAnon. Certainly not you, not me. None of us are in jail. So give me a break. You might not like what big tech is doing. You might think it's corrupt. You might think the outcomes are going to be bad. But free speech, you still have. Well, I mean, free speech is about putting people in jail. It's not about efficiency. I mean, it's not an issue of inefficiency. There's certain people they know who are speaking up against the government. They could tomorrow send the FBI and put them in jail. The government is not forcing big tech to cut people off. And indeed, if the government was doing that, then many more of us would be cut off. Many more of us with big platforms, not just me with a little platform. Many people with large platforms would be cut off. Why just Trump, and why just Paula, and why just QAnon? I mean, there are millions and millions of people who have dissenting views to what the views are of the left. I mean, it turns out 70, 80 million of us who disagree with much of what the left stands for. You still have free speech. All right, we still have elections. And if the government is putting pressure on big tech, then I'd like to see the proof of that. Not anecdotes, but the proof that it's actually happening. I'd like to see the proof that big tech is censoring by proxy, rather than making decisions based on their own evaluation and based on their own standards, which we and you might not like. But it's their standards, it's their evaluations, and it turns out it's their property. And if they violated, and by the way, if they violated terms of service, or if they violated contracts, sue them, as Paula has sued Amazon. We will see who wins that lawsuit. So before considering a revolution, the first thing to ask is, are there options? Are there alternatives? Are there alternatives? And we live in a world where there are lots of alternatives. You can still speak, you can still argue, you can still educate, you can still try to convince, you can still write books, you can write articles, you can start a podcast. You can even have a YouTube and Twitter channel. And you can argue your case, argue your ideas. And for the most part, you're left alone. Even by private companies who don't like you. But the second condition for a revolution, one is no alternatives. Second is, and the reason no alternative is that revolutions are violent. You only take up arms in order to bring about something significantly, dramatically better. And you only take up arms against the government, risk your life, when you don't think an alternative will do, when you're being shut down, when you're being silenced, when your actions are being restrained in the realm of ideas. And of course, you need to have a clear, specific alternative, which is freedom. It's not good enough to say, I don't like the people in power, I want them out. It's not good enough to say, they're corrupt, they're bad, they're evil, I want them out. What are you offering in its stead? Note the beauty of the American Revolution. They wrote a statement, not only of the things that had been done to them that they thought were violations such that a revolution was necessary, but a statement that articulated what the proper role of government was and the kind of government they would institute if they won. The revolution was a revolution. The revolution was a revolution of ideas. It was a revolution not just for the sake of replacing a bad regime. It was for the sake of instituting a good regime. What good regime would people today institute if there was a revolution? What would the right put in place of Biden? Trump? Q? One of the congressmen who believes in Q? What does the right have to offer today? As a flag for a revolution, as a declaration of a revolution, as a declaration of a governing philosophy? Nothing. Hatred, negativity, authoritarianism. So, if you're going to have a revolution, you've got to have ideas. Ideas that are good. Ideas that move you towards freedom. You've got to offer a clear, unambiguous alternative that is significantly and dramatically superior to what you're replacing. Now, when is any of that viable? When is any of that viable? Because if you're going to engage in revolution, you at least have to have some odds of victory, some possibility of success. Now, when is that possible? Well, it's only possible if you live in a culture ready for such a revolution. A culture in which a significant portion of the people already accept the ideas that you're articulating. It doesn't necessarily have to be a majority, but it has to be an important, influential, significant minority if it's not the majority. The American Revolution could not have succeeded, would have been nothing, would have been meaningless, if the culture wasn't ready for it. The culture in America. The culture in America was a culture of enlightenment. It was a culture that had gone through an educational process over 70 or so years before the revolution, preparing people, inculcating the ideas that get articulated in the document, in the Declaration of Independence. So when Americans read the Declaration of Independence, they understood it. They got it. Not all of them supported it, but a significant proportion of the population did. They got it. They wanted more freedom. Almost all of them wanted more freedom. The disagreements usually were about, can we get more freedom under the British, or is a revolution necessary? It wasn't about the desire for freedom. But is there desire for freedom in the culture in which we live? Is there desire for freedom in the world around us? Is there desire for freedom in this culture? I don't see it. Who's going to back your revolution? Who's going to support you? Who's going to rally to your side? There's almost nobody out there who actually understands the cause of freedom, who actually understands what individual rights are, who actually understands the value of fighting for freedom, who understands the principles on which this country was founded and understands the Constitution. I mean, how many people like that are there? I mean, people want handouts. Many of the people on January 6th were upset because Trump was going to offer them $2,000 and Democrats or the Congress only gave $600. Where's my other $1,400? They want goodies. They want handouts. They want the other side to lose. They don't care about the other side. They have no ideas. So, who is going to support this revolution that you're supposed to engage in? So, it isn't time yet to raise up arms against the American regime. It isn't time yet for a revolution. I mean, it might be borderline time to go on strike at whatever level you can go on strike. But it's certainly not time for an armed revolution because there's nobody to fight with on your side. And the outcome of any overthrow of this regime is likely to be something worse, not something better. Now people ask me, what about Ragnar in Atlas Shrugged? I mean, after all, he is a man of violence. He is a man of force. The pirate. Now, I'm not going to try not to give too much away of the plot. But the pirate. Why is that justified? And why is it not justified today for us to use force against those who are oppressing us? I mean, I'd say a few things. One is that Ragnar is part of a broad strategy. A strategy that involves actively pursuing the self-destruction of society, of the culture. It's not a revolution. They're not trying for a revolution. What they're trying for is self-destruction and an escape from that self-destruction. He is part of a grand strategy. A strategy with two others, one responsible for speeding up the economic collapse. The other, both really responsible for enhancing or speeding up the economic collapse and saving the best people from that collapse, from the consequence of that collapse. But all three are working actively for the self-destruction of civilization, of the culture. It's not civilized anymore, in which they live. And they're taking different ways in order to do this. They have a clear plan, a clear strategy. They clearly understand what values they're fighting for. They clearly understand what the outcome is going to be. They don't need large numbers, but they are working to educate people so that when they come back, and I'm trying not to give too much away, right? They can rebuild society as a properly free society. They're not just overthrowing the regime and expecting everything to stay. They're actively destroying the current culture in order to replace it with something dramatically better. So it's too soon for a revolution, guys. And the people who tried it on, or maybe tried it, who knows, on January 6th, are so incompetent, so pathetic, so the opposite of strategic and thoughtful and thinking. So weak, with no ideology, no plan, no thinking, just faith. Faith that things will work out. Faith that Trump will save them somehow. Faith that the powers to be will just collapse before them. On Wednesday, whether you like it or not, whether I like it or not, whether anybody likes it or not, Joe Biden will become president of the United States. A revolution will not happen. And it shouldn't happen. It's not. We're not ready. It's too early. There are not enough people. There are not people who believe in the ideas. We haven't collapsed far enough. We haven't educated vast numbers enough. We don't have a plan. We don't have a strategy. And we don't have the people. So forget the idea of revolution for now. Certainly not with these clowns, with the clowns, with the Trumpist clowns who can't think, can't strategize, can't go anywhere. Those clowns are not on our side. They're not on the side of liberty. They're not on the side of freedom. They're not on the side of a proper revolution. What is still needed in America, what is still worth fighting for in America, what we must still fight for in America, is an ideological revolution, a philosophical revolution, a revolution of ideas. We can still speak, maybe not for long. We can still vote, maybe not for long. But as long as we can speak, as long as we can write, as long as we can do podcasts, as long as we can do YouTubes, we must continue to fight. Fight against the Trumpist clowns like Ken on my chat. Fight against the leftists from AOC to Biden. Fight against the ideas that are prevalent throughout our culture. Fight the left, fight the right, fight the middle, because they're all wrong. And just to illustrate that these people, the people, who are out there fighting for Trump are not our allies, just look at my chat. Are these people you want to go to barricades with? Are these people you want to fight on their side? For what? Rez or Corey, I'm trying to get you unbanned. We still don't have it figured out. Last I heard, once you ban somebody on YouTube, you can't undo it. But we're still making the effort, so I apologize. I mean, if I'm going to go in the barricades, if I'm going to go in the trenches, if I'm going to go and have a revolution, I want to do it to people who actually know what they're talking about, who actually have ideas, who actually stand for something rational, something worth fighting for, something worth risking our lives for. Just defeating the left for what is not a reason to fight. And, you know, the pragmatism of I'm going to use big tech to attack big tech. I'm going to be friends with big tech when they like me. I'm going to hate big tech when they don't like me. You know, again, unprincipled people out there who stand for nothing, who believe in nothing other than two things: hatred of the left, and love of Trump. And really what binds them together, all of these people, I see them all, is hatred of the left. That's the one thing that is striking, but you don't win anything through hate. What are you fighting for? What do you stand for? All right, let's see. Super chat. You say that if we lose free speech is when we have to rebel violently, even if we lose. What if well, not necessarily. When we lose free speech, one option is to rebel violently. The other option is to disappear. It's to leave. That is, if you're going to lose, there's no point in committing suicide. So another option is to find some other way to live, maybe in a different country, maybe in a different part of the world. But fighting to lose is... What if free speech is allowed, but we're all driven into poverty by extreme socialist policy implementations? Then you have to fight them. But how do you fight them? How are you going to fight them? And what's the alternative? Again, what's the alternative? So let's say, you know, we fight them and we bring back Donald Trump, who wants $2,000 checks and wants an infrastructure project and wants all the things the Democrats want and wants to drive us into poverty in the name of national conservatism. You place one socialist with another socialist. You know, if there was a viable plan to establish free markets, and there were enough people who could make that plan work, and we were being driven into poverty with socialists, then you know, you could launch a revolution. I'm not sure why you need it, because if you've got enough people to support such a revolution, couldn't you just win at the ballot box? I mean, I get that some of you believe that Joe Biden is Chavez. That America under Joe Biden is going to be Venezuela. That the Democrats are going to nationalize industries, including the oil industry, shut it down, and that we are going to soon be starving in the streets of America. Now, I get it. If you believe that, then you're desperate and you want to do something. Now, I'd say the first thing you should do is convince Americans that that's what's happening. And I guess at some point, a revolution is in order, if that's the case. But none of that is true. As much as I hate Biden and as much as I hate the Democrats, it will take several generations to get this country to the state of Venezuela. And Joe Biden is not going to nationalize anything. I mean, I think more likely that Republicans would nationalize big tech. Remember, there are antitrust enforcements now against Google and against Facebook, not launched by Democrats, launched by a Republican Justice Department. So I don't know what it is. I mean, we're not going to be driven into poverty by extreme socialist policies anytime soon. But if we don't get a frigging act together, if you guys don't stop following stupid conspiracy theories, if you guys don't stop being emotionalist, faith-based, worshippers of certain individuals, then yeah, this country will continue to sink. This country will become more and more left. And indeed, you guys voting for Trump, you guys supporting Trump, you guys promoting Trump has led to the left taking over. The left didn't take over because I didn't endorse Trump. The left has taken over because a majority of Americans rejected Republicans. A majority of Americans rejected Donald Trump and rejected Republicans in the House 2 years ago and in the Senate this time. It is Trump. Trump's biggest legacy is he took power with the Republican Senate, Republican House, and Republicans steamrolling the Democrats. And he left with the Republicans controlling nothing. And in disarray, fragmented, weakened, and probably out of power for a long, long time. So if anybody is responsible for this country going socialist, it's Trump. The left has been taken over for the last century. I've been saying that over and over again. Yes. And will continue to take over unless there's a real opposition. And if you create pseudo-oppositions, absurd oppositions, ridiculous oppositions, illegitimate oppositions, all you do is strengthen the left. Takeover will happen faster. If you engage in ridiculous attempts at overthrowing the government for nothing, the left will just get stronger and more emboldened. We are heading towards socialist disaster. There's no question. It'll just take longer than many of you think. But that's where we're heading unless we change direction, unless we convince people to change direction. And you guys will not convince anybody. You've done the opposite. Socialists are everywhere. The Republican Party has become a socialist party. But we need an alternative. We need options. We need solutions. We need to present ideas. Should you consider whether there is any reasonable chance of winning? Yes. I mean, there's no point in going to a revolution if you're going to lose. And this is why you need to have a significant portion of the culture on your side. And the fact is that as objectivists, as advocates of capitalism, we do not have a significant portion of the culture on our side. Nobody's saying it's all Trump's fault, Stephanie. Trump just made it worse. That's all. It was bad before he arrived. And it's going to be even worse after he leaves. He accelerated a process that was already happening. He created and he emboldened the Democratic Party and destroyed the Republican Party. Republican Party served as a decent. It wasn't, yes. Trump sped up the decline. That's all I'm saying. Decline was there. I've been saying this all along. Decline's been there for 100 years. We need a new political party to replace the dead Republicans. But to ignore the fact that Trump sped up the process, to ignore the fact that Trump has destroyed the Republican Party and therefore destroyed whatever hope there is for an opposition to the nutty Democrats, is to ignore reality and to ignore politics. You don't understand politics. What is the effect of altruism on... well, let me get to that in a minute. Assuming that it is a justified revolution for rights, is it more just to have a declaration and attempt a peaceful separation than to attack first in a coup? Does who strikes first matter? No, it doesn't. I don't think it does. I think it depends on strategically. I mean, certainly in 1776, in order to rally the country to their side, and because of distances and the availability of time, a declaration made sense. I think probably a declaration today makes sense in the sense of you can put it up on social media. But no, today speed matters more, surprise matters more. You're up against far greater forces than you were in 1776. I think how you go about it, again, assuming it's justified, really depends on the circumstances. Really depends on the circumstances. We're in a unique and unprecedented situation in the sense that past revolutions had no other means other than violence, as oppression of ideas was common. That's absolutely true. Nowadays, we do have freedom to express ideas, making violence only a last resort. I think that's absolutely right. And the fact that we're not convincing everybody, anybody, or everybody, is on us. It's on us. So before we go complaining to the world, let's try convincing the world. Before we take up arms and start shooting people, let's try to convince them. But we're not. Most people, even most people who hold these ideas, are quiet. They don't want to get involved. They don't want to risk it. They don't want to upset people. So if you really care, you got to get involved. You got to start trying to convince people of the values of capitalism, of the values of capitalism as a political, social political system. All right, before I forget, we've got almost 200 people watching. We should have more likes, so please like the show before you leave. Like. I'm amazed. I have to remind you guys every time. So please, let's get that up over 100, over 120 if possible. Share the show. One way to fight the socialists, the bad guys, the fascists, the people on the left, people on the right, all the irrationality in the middle and everywhere else is by handing them a book of Ayn Rand's. Sending them links of Ayn Rand lectures and Ayn Rand talks and Ayn Rand stuff. Sending people links to Leonard Peikoff's lectures. And of course, sharing this show. There's so much material today that you guys have at your fingertips to share with people, to help educate people, to get in front of people, to try to get them to see the truth. We need to do much, much more of that. If you want to ask questions, Super Chat is open. Of course, the higher the dollar amount, the more likely it is that I take the question. And remember, it's a form of supporting the show. So value for value, those of you who listen and who don't pay anything, a free writing over those who actually do pay. So appreciate your support at whatever level it is, at however much you value the show. So you can do that in the Super Chat. You can do that on YaronBrookShow.com/support. You can do it on Patreon, Subscribestar, on Locals. Many, many ways in which to support this. Okay. Another question. When is it too late to have a revolution? The society represented in 1984 is an example of this. How much of a gap will there be between the time for revolution and the time when all hope is lost? I don't think all hope is ever lost. I think 1984 is a flawed novel in a sense that it depicts the government. It depicts the authoritarians as way too efficacious, way too competent, way too able, with way too sophisticated technology. The extent to which in 1984 the human mind is shut down would lead such a culture to deteriorate economically dramatically. People would be poor. There would be no technology. There would be no ability of the government to monitor everything that you do. Indeed, the best example of dystopia in the future is Ayn Rand's Anthem. Because they're living like human beings lived 3,000 years ago. Because that's what actually would happen if totalitarianism actually succeeded in the world. We would deteriorate backwards to the Stone Age, not have high sophisticated technology like you see in 1984 and other dystopian novels. And it's one of the things that I say why I don't worry about North Korea, why I don't worry about China. It's because the more authoritarian they become, the weaker they are. The more authoritarian they become, the less economic activity, the less wealth, the less sophistication, the less technology, the less ability to confront us. So, authoritarianism leads to poverty. Always. It's why Ayn Rand was not worried about the Soviet Union. She said they'll collapse. Just a question of time. Don't know when, but they will collapse. And it's the same. Any authoritarian regime will collapse in the end. Takes time, but they will collapse because they can't sustain it. It's not possible. They can't feed their own people. The more authoritarian they become, the weaker they become. The more authoritarian they become, the weaker internally they become. The more authoritarian they become, the more likely it is that they have a revolution internally. I'm enjoying your show Inside My Greenhouse, Planting Spring Flowers. Are people giving up on happiness for political drama? The alternative is to many people ignoring the drama and giving them free rein. Yeah, I mean, it's striking the extent to which people are obsessed with politics. And it's a sign of how bad our society is and how far we've come and how big a role government plays in our lives. The bigger the role the government plays in our lives, the more important politics becomes in everybody's lives. You know, the fact that so many people voted in this last election, it was a record election in terms of the percentage of Americans voted. That's not a good thing. I don't think it's good for a lot of Americans to vote. It's a sign that the government has too much power. The government is involved in too much of our lives. So it's the fact that anyway, lost the train of thought there. That's fine. Let's see. What is this? Ken says, did you guys know that almost every state would be red if not for female voters? And thank God for female voters. Imagine if every single state was red. Every single state. Imagine if we had just one political party. Just the Republican Party. Would we actually be better off? Would we be freer? If the Democrats tomorrow just disappeared and all you had was Republicans, one party rule, Republicans. I don't know where this adoration for the Republicans comes from. And I see here people saying, Leonard Peacock voted for Trump. Yeah, he did. Lots of people voted for Trump. I have no problem with people voting for Trump. Did you guys celebrate when Leonard Peacock voted for Bill Clinton in 1992? Did you guys celebrate when Leonard Peacock voted for John Kerry in 2004? You know, your appeal to authority is convenient, right? When he votes the way you want him to vote. No, it wasn't 1972. Bill Clinton wasn't in 1972. 1992, right? Bill Clinton. Anyway, somebody says it's a one-party rule of Republicans is better than one-party rule of Democrats. Maybe, but I don't want one-party rule of either one of them right now. I think they balance each other off. I'm glad that women have some states they can go to get abortions. So having a few blue states just to be able to have abortions is a good thing. I'm glad the Republicans can ram down all the things that they would like to ram down our throats. I want divided government. What if the election was really stolen, and what would be the right response? The right response will be to go through the legal proceedings that our system of government provides us in order to go through, to challenge an election. We are a government, we are a country of laws, not of emotions, not of mobs, not of rule by mob, but of laws. Joe says we should be pursuing no party rule. Absolutely. We should be pursuing a proper constitution that protects the rights of individuals, where it doesn't matter who's in power, because they're so weak. But that's not the kind of government we have. We have a government that rules over our lives in all kinds of ways. And the only way right now we can protect ourselves from such government is to keep it divided. It's to keep it ineffectual. It's to keep it from uniting around a particular agenda that's going to destroy us. Because both Republicans and Democrats do not have our individual self-interest in mind. They don't have our rights in mind. They're not out to protect our rights. If they were, then all the power to them, but they're not. So we have to play the system until we can educate people about the right form of government, until we can educate people about the establishment of a rights-respecting government. We have to play the political game in a way that does not speed up the process of deterioration. My argument is Trump sped it up. All right, let's see. What is the effect of altruism on pride? It destroys it. It makes it impossible. Altruism tells you that you should never be proud. Humility is the virtue, right? Pride is the seeking out of your own moral perfection. It's making you the best. It's making you ideal. It's striving to become the ideal man, the best that you can be. Well, altruism says that that's evil, that your purpose in life is other people. Well, that defeats the whole purpose of pride. That undermines pride. It's not about you, it's about them. And indeed, altruism, proper altruism, tells you that if while you're pursuing the interest of other men, you're doing it partially because you feel good about yourself for helping other people, then it doesn't count. So, altruism makes pride psychologically impossible. Let's see. All right. Having pictures and sculptures spread around the house isn't the same as listening to great music while doing something else. The ideal wouldn't be to have a separate room just for the purpose of art appreciation. Well, no, but I think music and visual arts work differently on you. I mean, this is a complicated topic, and I'm not claiming to have all the answers, but this is just my speculation, if you will. Because music is so abstract, it needs to be, to be fully appreciated. You can have music in the background, which is fine. Depends on the type of music. But music in the background does not allow the music to actually impact your emotions in the way that it can and should. Because it is, because of its nature, because it's so abstract, you need to actually focus on it to get the emotional response that is required. Now, it's true that if it's popular music, the emotion is shallow. The emotion is, you can do that while driving, you can do that, it's no problem. You get that no matter what. But to get any significant, deep emotional connection with music requires concentration and focus. Now, to some extent, that's true of art as well. So you can have pictures and sculpture spread around the house. But to get the full impact of the sculpture and the painting, I highly recommend stopping once in a while and just looking and just letting yourself experience the thing as a sculpture or as a painting. Just look at it, appreciate it. Yeah, I think, so I don't think there's a false dichotomy here. I think it's true. I think that having certain types of music in the background is not a bad thing. I've never been against that. I just don't think you could fully appreciate it. I don't think you can fully appreciate sculpture and painting just in the background. I encourage you, if you go to a museum, for example, and I've said this when I've done shows on art appreciation in a museum, for example, is find a few paintings you really want to focus on and spend time with them. Same with sculptures. Spend time with them. Don't try to take in the whole museum. Don't try to absorb everything. Don't do it fast. Do it slowly. So, in both music and pictures and sculptures, you want to focus on the art. But music requires a different level of concentration to get the full effect of it. And because it's auditory, there's something about the fact that you can look at a sculpture and you can visually separate the sculpture from its environment. And allow yourself to focus on the sculpture without blanking the environment out. With sound, it's very difficult to do that. If you're listening to music and somebody's talking at the same time, you're not getting the music. So it's got to do with the difference in the way the senses work. And I don't have a full explanation for why. But the fact is that when you listen to music, but the noise is in the background, it upsets you. It bugs you in a way that art doesn't. I'll give you one other example. I think this is the way to think about it. Think about it this way. If you go to a modern art museum and you see modern junk on the wall, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt you. You don't feel physically offended by it. You look at the white on white or splashes of Kandinsky paint on a thing and you go, boring, meaningless, nothingness. That's what this is. You might hate it, but you're not physically in pain. Go to a modern music concert where they screech atonal music at you. And you literally squirm. Literally, you want to hold your hands to your ears. It literally hurts. It's more than just annoyed. It hurts you. So there's something about music that is different than about the visual. What exactly that is, how that works, I don't know. I don't know enough about music. Was the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising rational and moral, even though they had a high probability of losing and ultimately did lose? Yes, absolutely, it was immoral and rational. I mean, not only did it have a high probability of losing and dying, but they knew exactly what would happen if they didn't revolt, which was die. That is, the choice was to die passively, to die without offering a resistance, or to die fighting. Now, I would prefer dying fighting any day. If I'm going to die, I'm going to take out as many of the bad guys as possible with me. I don't know, somebody says, am I open to the idea that I'm projecting? Projecting what? On whom? I don't know what you're talking about. So I'm not, you'll have to clarify that. Projecting in terms of music, in terms of politics, I don't know. So I think if you have pride, if you value your life, if you, I see questions. I'm taking them out of order because I'm taking the ones with bigger dollar amounts before the ones with smaller amounts of dollars. So I haven't skipped over anything, I hope. In music, I'm projecting. No, I don't think I'm projecting. I think there's an objective difference between the way our auditory function works and the way our visual functions work, and the way music as an art works and the way sculpture and painting work. But I suggest you run the experiment on yourself. Listen the way I suggested. Look at sculpture and painting the way I suggested. Flip it around. Experiment. Play around with it. And, you know, maybe you'll disagree. Maybe you won't. But at least give it a shot, right? So Warsaw Ghetto. I mean, I never understood the Jews who walked into into Auschwitz and walked into the gas chambers and just died and didn't put up a fight. And at least in Warsaw, they put up a fight. And I think that's appropriate. I think anybody who has pride, anybody who values his life, anybody who loves his life, does not want to just die. What you want to be actively in the act of destroying your enemies if you're going to die anyway. Somebody says music gives me visuals. Maybe, but it will only give you visuals if you're single-mindedly focused on it. If it's just in the background, it can give you visuals because your visual faculty is busy with something else. That's the thing. Music requires you to shut down your other faculties to fully appreciate it. And I'd actually say sculpture can be enhanced by music. I'm not sure music can be enhanced with sculpture. I think that's right. Anyway, as I said, I can't prove that. This is not objectivism. It's my speculations about music and art in this respect. All I can say is you guys should try it out. If you get visuals, that's great. But again, to get the visual for music, you have to be single-mindedly focused on the music. Because if you're not, then you're not going to get the visual because you've got the visual that you've got is existence. That's why I like listening to music with my eyes closed, because then the visuals can come much easier because they have nothing to compete with. All right, why did Atlas Shrugged fail to change the culture, or is it succeeding just a lot slower than expected? I mean, I think it's succeeding, but a lot slower than expected. I think it's slow because it's fighting against 2,000 years of altruism. It's fighting against 3,000 years of Plato. It's fighting against a culture that is turned its back on the Enlightenment. I think if Atlas Shrugged had been written 50 years earlier, it would have had a shot at impacting the culture much faster. It was written too late or too early, but the culture wasn't ready for it because they had rejected and are rejecting the Enlightenment ideas. They're rejecting reason and individualism. And without that, there's nothing for objectivism and Atlas Shrugged to hook onto in the culture. So, yeah, somebody says, don't forget 300 years of Kant. Yeah, I mean, it's 2,000 years of Christianity, 300 years of Kant, 2,500 years or so of Plato, and almost no voices opposed to them other than Aristotle. And Kant and everybody who follows him turning their backs on the Enlightenment. And then comes Ayn Rand and says, no, the Enlightenment was right, but let me dramatically improve on what they said and correct all their mistakes. Who was she talking to? Who's there? So it's just late. All right, let's see. You've said one problem with conservatives is that they are only trying to conserve. But how is that different from your buying time strategy? It's not. If they were conserving in order to buy time, I support that. I'm not opposed to voting for conservatives and supporting conservatives at times in order to buy time. So there's nothing wrong with conserving if there's a higher purpose. And I'm all for buying time. I'm all for divided government. I'm all for giving neither side of the current political spectrum full control so that we can have more time to change the culture. But the culture needs to be changed. And this is the point I tried to make earlier. Revolution cannot come, will not come. Freedom will not come. We will not move to win more individual rights until the culture, not the politics, has changed. So instead of dealing with politics, we should be dealing with how to change the culture, how to change the set of ideas that the culture holds, how to bring about a renaissance of reason and individualism. And then if you change the culture, politics is downstream from culture, then politics will take care of itself. Lex Friedman just interviewed a female philosophy professor who said, quote, "My brightest students are always begging me to read Ayn Rand." Yes, I know. Ayn Rand is out there. She's still out there. She's still changing the world. Atlas Shrugged is still changing one mind at a time, and it's still going to win in the end. It just is slow. Are you ever obliged to leave instead of revolt if there are better places to go? Yes, absolutely. Your life is the standard. There's no duty to sacrifice for some higher cause. So your life is the standard. So it's the context of your life which will determine whether you stay at fight, leave, where you leave to, and so on. Marvel or DC stories if you had to choose. I don't know either one. Sorry, I'm really ignorant when it comes to comics. I have no idea what the difference between Marvel and DC is. What if an election actually was stolen? What would be the right response? I think I answered that already. The right response would be to go through the court system to overturn it. Isn't there some virtue in being a small business, especially a restaurant, as quality and ambiance remain authentic? Is localism a legit concept? I mean, those are two different questions. Yeah, I mean, for a restaurant, there's certainly value in staying small, in being local, in having an ambiance, in knowing your customers, and on a first-name basis, and things like that. But it also depends on how ambitious you are and what you want to achieve. But many great chefs who start with one restaurant maybe start another one, or maybe they stick with one restaurant, but they just make it so famous and so successful that they make a lot of money at it. So there's no problem. There's nothing wrong with small business. But most small businesses want to be big. That's part of how success is defined. Is localism a legit concept? No. There's nothing legitimate about localism. Localism is about buying local, sourcing local, other than fruits and vegetables, which might be fresher if they're bought local. But there's no value in buying from people close by. The value is in providing the best service and the best products for the price. And if that comes from another country or from another state or from next door, is irrelevant. It's a question of price and quality. That's the value you're offering. You're not offering some vague notion of patriotism. I think there's fireworks outside right now. Do all political parties represent a form of collectivism? Well, they do today. They do today. Do they have to? Maybe. I mean, remember that the founders were really disappointed that right after the Constitutional Convention, political parties were already being founded. They hoped that America would not have political parties, that people would run as individuals with individual sets of ideas. So parties tend towards collectivism and tend towards conflict and tend towards disagreement rather than towards finding solutions. It becomes a team sport. It becomes them against us rather than a truth-seeking venture. Do you think government can destroy Bitcoin? Can it? Yes, I think it can. I mean, at the very extreme, it could shut down every server anywhere. It could outlaw mining activities, particularly if it could do it on a global scale, absolutely. Will it? Probably not. It will try to regulate it. It will try to control it. It will try to find ways to make it irrelevant. But I don't think they're going to try to destroy it, because destroying Bitcoin would involve destroying too much more. As I said, shutting down servers and creating real havoc and destruction. So, I mean, an authoritarian government, when we get to the point where they're desperate and they really need to do this and Bitcoin is viewed as a real threat, yeah, then it becomes possible that they will try to do it. Whether they can be successful is a different question. I have both Apple Music and Amazon Music. Apple gives you analysis of what you are listening to. Cool. I didn't know that. I didn't know it gives the analysis. I listen to Primephonic, which has a fabulous collection of classical music. Primephonic, it's an app on the phone. Just an amazing collection of classical music and well organized. I really like their website, their app. Agree with everything you said about music. I hope you have time to listen to CD I sent. I just got it. Where is it? There it is. I just got it. Reason and Romance by Chris McGaw. So I haven't had a chance, but it literally came in the mail, I think, yesterday. So on my desk, I expect to listen to it. Well, when I have a CD player, which I'm not sure exactly when will happen, but I don't have a CD player right now. I don't have a CD drive on my computers, but I will have one when my stuff arrives from California and we get settled in. But that could be. I could stream it. Okay, I'll stream it. I'll stream it then. Because that's going to be a while before I get my setup. Probably May. Before everything's done, everything's ready. We're moved into the new place and have my system set up, my home theater, my hi-fi, and also my computer system with a disk drive. Whew, all right, we're done. Unless there are any other super chat question, I think we're done. I'm not calling for a revolution, but I am calling you to like the show before you leave. If you like the show, 4 people didn't. I wonder who they are. Huh. Yes, in Puerto Rico. I am permanently now full-time in Puerto Rico, buying a condominium in Puerto Rico. And yeah, this is where life's going to be for the next 10 years or so. Hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like before you leave. Don't forget to support the show through youronbookshow.com/support. Really looking still for another $1,500 before we get to that level that I said I need to get to, about $1,500 a month to get to that level. So it would be great to get some new contributors on youronbookshow.com/support. And what do we have on top of that? We have Patreon and Subscribestar and Locals. Do you think certain album covers can add to the music experience? Not to the music experience. I think to the experience of buying and owning a record. You know, I still remember LPs. Yeah, I mean, to the whole aesthetic experience, but to the music itself, no. The music itself stands on its own or doesn't stand on its own. But the cover, you know, can inspire in and of itself, right? It is connected. All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. I'll talk to you probably tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be a good day for me because it's Martin Luther King Day. We might do something on Martin Luther King. Maybe we'll do something on racism in America and Martin Luther King and all of that. We still need to do maybe Wednesday. We still need to do unfortunately, we need to do like a farewell party to Donald Trump, or something around a summary of Donald Trump's 4 years. Maybe we don't. Maybe I do enough of that as we go along. All right, everybody. Talk to you soon.